I know.
Good afternoon and welcome back again, Realty Pros. Welcome and happy Thursday to all of you who joined us today for Porterhouse Realty Talks. Today, our topic of conversation is going to be with regards to difficult buyer transactions. What challenge did you face and how did you overcome it in order to get to settlement for your client? So that topic of conversation is going to be open to everybody that's on the line. Between Mr. Porter and I, we could probably talk for about 3 weeks nonstop about challenges and how we've overcome them in order to get to settlement for our clients. But before we share those topics, we want to just open the floor up to you guys and welcome. I see we have a couple other people that have joined since our earlier welcome to you guys. Thank you for logging in. So let's go ahead, jump right in and begin our conversation for today. Before we began our recording, Darlene, you said you had a testimonial, a difficult buyer transaction that you overcame and got to closing for your client. Tell us about that.
Okay, so it started in, I think it was July 2020. And this was more or less like a generational house where I was actually dealing with 3 women. And the sale started out like a regular sale. And then in the midst of this sale, unfortunately, it ended up being, because it was an estate sale, the person that listed it didn't do their due diligence, and it became a short sale. So now they were upset, because they thought that I knew and blah, blah, blah. So with it being a short sale, it took months. And I think they end up going to closing the following year, February the 26th, 2021. So what I had to do was endure just the different conversations with them. And then we kept doing an extension on the close date. And me explaining it to them, it was just like us kicking the can, up the road, because really what the house that they had, the offer on, it really was a nice house. It was priced well, and everything else that they were looking at was over their budget. So it was the change in terms form that we kept filing for an extension. It was me just listening to or having to endure the different, attitudes and things like that, and just biting my tongue. But in all, we finally did go to closing, but they really did think that, it was something out there that was better than what they had. And, and I, we went on showings, but they never found anything within their price range that was better than what their original contract they set. So long story short, we did get the closing, and everything was good. So it was me biting my tongue, that change in terms of form, and that was it. But I left out a lot.
Darlene, yeah. Darlene used me as bait, by the way, guys. I just want y'all to know
that. I remember that.
It was three ladies. And so they were giving Darlene a really hard time at points. And one of the ladies Darlene was very close to. And I went to the house one time, and they just was, oh, Mr. Porter, Mr. Porter, Mr. Porter.
Yes.
So every now and then, Darlene would use me, guys, as bait to get the ladies to calm down.
Yes, I did.
And it seemed like the eldest lady was the one that, where's that Mr. Porter? I want to see Mr. Porter come tell me this. I hear what you saying, but I want to hear from it. And I couldn't tell her on the phone. I had to physically go meet with them. So, Darlene, thanks for using me like a piece of meat. I just wanted to say that
sure
to you.
Did.
I remember that transaction.
I did use you like a piece of meat. I'm sorry. Hey, but you said you do what you got to do to close the deal.
Listen, it worked out well. If all they needed to see was Mr. Porter to believe what you were telling them, kudos, Mr. Porter.
She loved him. I was like, what is your fascination with this man? Yes, this is true.
That was a huge success. Thank you for being a team player, Mr. Porter. We appreciate you. So sometimes it takes a different approach. It is what it is.
Exactly.
So
And
that
thank
was
you. That
awesome.
was a good one. Yeah, that was a good one.
So what do you think was the biggest of those challenges, Darlene? You mentioned a number of different things. Which one do you think was the biggest?
And I'm in one word. Oh, you said challenge?
Mhm.
The biggest challenge was not being debatable for me, because you were dealing with a lot of people that knew a whole lot about something that knew nothing about nothing. And so for me, the biggest challenge was just letting them, tell me what they know and think that's how it is, only to sit back and then they'll be like, oh, that's not how it is. No, that's not. So the challenge was me trying to, not really just being combative with them. That was a challenge for me because, it was like, what you're saying is not right. So it wasn't even about me trying to prove them wrong. It was just me sitting back and allowing whatever was going to come forward to present itself so that they can see, not necessarily me having to prove them wrong. Because at that point, it wasn't about, being right or wrong. It was just getting to the finish line.
Excellent.
Well,
I'm so glad. I'm glad you
one of
didn't
the
skip that.
one of the things that I can say, that Darlene and I work with Darlene in this closely, but one of the things that I wanted to reinforce with Darlene and that she did excellently was she continued to be communicative no matter how hard it got, and she continued to disclose everything that was pertinent to the transaction. And she kept in mind that things that would distract from the transaction, it was things that we didn't necessarily need to share. And we talked about
Yes.
that last week. So,
Yes.
attitudes
Yes.
from sellers and sellers agents and frustration, we don't share that with our clients. It's not necessary. We kept their eyes on the prize. Darlene kept focusing them down the road. It seemed like it would never come. It was almost a year. If it wasn't, it was almost a year. It felt like at least a year.
It felt
And
like
to try to
it.
keep people, to keep people fixated on the prize is just big kudos to Darlene. And I think that was one of your first transactions with Porterhouse.
Yes. Yes,
So
it was. Yes,
yeah,
it
I
was.
remember that very well, very vividly. But we worked through it, and guys, sometimes, like we said, sometimes these things are smooth, and then sometimes they're crash landings. This was one that had a lot of turbulence in the sky. We landed well. The landing was easy. The takeoff was easy, but the turbulence in the sky was rough. But we persevered, and Darlene, you did a great job in that transaction. I think you
But
learned a
I
lot too.
think I do. And I think I need to point this one thing out just so that they can have an idea of the personality. So it was like we would go on showings. And when we would go into the house, the things that they were concerned about was they would go in the closets and they would look to me and they would be like, are they still married? I wonder if they still together. And I'm like, okay, well, I have all the information on the house. So it was like, that's what I was really dealing with. It was just like, just a bunch of, just as my granddad used to call it, cackling hens. It was like you're worried, you're worried about the people's issues in the house. No, let's just, we're looking at a house. So that's what I was dealing with, just different people women, not people, women who just gossipy, like whatever. So that's what I had to deal with. That's that. But it was good. It was all over.
But
We
but
did.
you
We good.
but the thing about it is you I think Darlene remained so professional and didn't engage in a lot of that conversation to the point that they almost didn't trust her because she wouldn't get involved in the gossip, and she kept focusing more on the property. And so that I guess that's when she needed to bring me in as that dangling bait to verify that
Yes.
she was still working in their favor. Because I guess she
Yes.
didn't participate in some of those conversations that they wanted to have and had nothing to do with the
Yes.
property. So again,
Yes.
it's hard. It's some hard work, but you did a great job in that transaction.
Yes, Mr. Porter, that's exactly what it was. Yes. That's exactly what it was.
Man, that was excellent. There are so many layers of detail, and I appreciate the abridged version, Darlene, but there's a little bit more meat that I want people to be able to benefit from. So when you have a transaction that goes from a standard sale to a short sale, that's a whole different consideration in and of itself with regards to time, with regards to quite a number of things on the inspection report, whether there are going to be any repairs that are going to be made, the time factor in and of itself. There's so many different unknowns that, you know, you would just be subject to because of the multiple extensions, like the market, the rate, the price increase or decrease, and all of those things. And if it took you guys that long, which I do remember, then that means the market values would have changed.
Yes,
That means that
ma'am.
they may have debated the BPOs on the property. That means that
Yes,
the bank
ma'am.
would have come back and countered, and the bank would have been looking at the new market value versus the value that they listed it for when it was on the market. That means that the buyer would have had to go back and go to the lender to say, hey, can we increase the price, or what considerations can we make in light of these things? So there's so much meat there.
Yes, and all of that happened. Everything that you just said, that all happened. Yes,
Talk
all
a
of
little.
it happened.
So as it pertains to a couple of things that I just said, give us just a hint of insight of another aspect of that you had to overcome.
So the house, okay, so the house was, I can't remember what it was listed at, but they went a little bit above the listing price. And we're just gonna throw out numbers. The house sold for, say, $550, but the house next door to them sold for $690. So you had that gap in there. Okay, so this was before the short sale piece. Now we're on the short sale side, and then the bank is now going back to do their own appraisal. So the bank comes back with an amount that was higher than the offer that they actually gave these people. So now we had to go back and forth with the bank in terms of what they were going to agree to pay for this house. And so the original offer that I think they gave was $565 or something like that, but the house appraised a little bit below the $565. And it's just like, I don't want to take up too much time, but the house appraised lower. The seller agreed to the lower price, but the bank wanted the higher price. And so, long story short, I'm telling them, I'm like, okay, you can either go on and move on and we can find another house, or you can go back to your original price that you offer for this house. And still, even though you're going back to that original price, you're still closing with equity because of what the houses in the neighborhood were selling for. But it took them literally a week. Now, I already knew they were going to do it because it was like they had no better options. So it took them a week to say to me, yes, that's what they were going to do. So they went back to their original offer, which I think was $565, and the bank took that counter. But it took a week for them to give me that decision.
Excellent. Guys, we could dig into this so much more, but I want to give somebody else an opportunity to share. Thank you so much for sharing that, Darlene. That was a tremendous feat. A transaction that just changed from a standard sale to a short sale and went on that long, and all the challenges that you overcame. Kudos to you. Hats off.
Yes, because they thought I knew that it was a short sale. I'm like, how would I know that? So it's me having to explain. I had no idea. So just like Mr. Porter said, they didn't, the trust issue became a factor. But
that just means that the listing agent and the seller, they didn't necessarily do their due diligence to know what the principal was versus the market value. But Thank you, Darlene. All right, next person. The question again was, what difficult buyer transaction did you face? What challenges did you overcome in order to get to settlement? So we want to think of some of those that were the really big ones that you say, what in the world, but you made it to settlement anyway. Go ahead, Christian. I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, it's a question I have for Darlene. I hope everybody doing well.
Hello.
How are you people doing today?
We are doing well, thanks. And you?
Good, good. My video might not be on because of my location, but I hope you're hearing me.
Yes, we hear you fine.
Okay. The question I have for her is, how were they able to be patient for the short sale to go through? Because it normally takes longer time. Did they have that kind of time on their hand to wait through the short sale period?
Well, they had that time, Christian. One, because the aunt was living in Ocean City and she was staying in I guess, an elderly community. And then the other two, they had, they were living in Suitland and I think up some part of Maryland. And so they did have the time because they were all doing this legacy home where the other two, they own homes that they needed to they were trying to get those houses in order to sell. So they had the time, so time really wasn't a factor for them. It's just that the aunt, she had to renting month to month. So that's how they were able to endure. And, they would have moved on, but they had already invested so much into the house. It was like the only way they would have moved on is if they had found a home that was going to be better than this one, like in terms of price and, an area. So that's what kept them that kept them in the deal.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, did you say something else?
No, I
Curtis, I
said
saw your hand raised. Sorry about that.
I say thank you.
Oh yeah, my pleasure.
Oh, I can go next if nobody else is going next.
Yeah, go ahead.
So basically, I want to say it was probably the end of 2020. I was dealing with a very indecisive buyer, where we would go look at a house and she would say, "Oh, I like it," and then she wouldn't want to put an offer on it, or say, "I like this," and I wouldn't want to put an offer on it. And the biggest thing that I had to kind of sit down and ask her was, what was the reason why she was saying no? And the biggest reason that she was saying no to some of the houses was because some furniture that she was giving her daughter had that wouldn't fit into a couple of the rooms. So once I figured that out, and I was like, "You're saying no to these houses for furniture that your daughter won't even be able to fit in the next couple of years anyways." Uh, so we finally put a contract on a house. I would say it was some time later, and I probably wrote about maybe like 6 contracts for this lady, and I stay really, really diligent with her. But we wrote a contract on the house, and her credit score ended up going down, and we had to try to get an extension. And then right when, I was working with Mr. Mike Cooper too, and right when we got everything fixed, the seller was like, we're not gonna sell you guys the house," where they tried to pull out the offer. She, basically she was upset, so I had to do a lot of motivating too, other than just, I would say a lot of the job is also motivating our clients to say that, you can do this, and this is, it's your time to be able to buy. You're put in this position for a certain reason. You're so close. Certain things like that I had to, keep telling her every day. And it was to a point where this lady would call me all the time. My girlfriend would get mad, like, so she was just like always calling me about different house, and the same thing as the Darlene was talking about, would ask about different things that have nothing to do with the real estate transaction. But then a month later, after the one contract fell through, we found a house, and everything was cool. But the biggest challenge, I would say, I just had to be totally upfront with her about what she can technically afford, and what things she shouldn't even waste her time of worrying about, because it won't matter in a year or 5 years or maybe even 10 years. And especially because this was her first house, I had to also tell her that her house, this is your first house. You may have a different type of lifestyle in 5 years or 10 years. I was like, you want to get something now instead of waiting for the market to go up. And then now that she sees that the market go up, I actually run into this client the most out of anybody else that I've worked with after this transaction. And she's like, oh, I'm so thankful that we got into a house before this market got so crazy and everything like that. So what's hard to endure is sweet to recall.
That was so great, Marcus. There is a lot in that one too. Oh my goodness gracious. I will open the floor for questions and comments for Marcus.
I wanted to thank Marcus because he was actually one of the agents that helped me with that one transaction. Thank you, Marcus.
No problem. No problem.
So this buyer, I hear that their credit score dropped, that the seller no longer wanted to wait for them to go through the process, that they were indecisive, choosing multiple homes and everything. So kudos to you for your diligence. You said something that was very pertinent to all of us as real estate professionals. It says salesperson on your guys' license, but it should kind of be open-ended because there are quite a number of things that you do in addition to that. And Marcus mentioned that you have to keep them encouraged throughout the process. He was encouraging that buyer to know, no matter what happens, don't give up. We keep writing offers until yours gets accepted. This is your time to buy a house. We're not giving up on the process. We're not finished until you get over that, the settlement finish line there. So kudos to you, Marcus. Does anybody else have any other questions for insight that they'd like to get from Marcus before we go on to the next person? All right, thank you so much for sharing that, Marcus. That was awesome. Curtis, I see you have your hand raised.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, so I got a few. I don't want to take up the remaining of the time. Well, I got quite a few, but I'll go with the first one that comes to mind. It was actually my first like solo buying client. I actually met them at my gym during a warm-up. So I was warming the class up and I was like, yeah, I'm a realtor now. And literally while we're stretching, this couple was like, hey, we're looking for a home. I was like, I got you. And basically got them pre-approved. We went out. We looked at 3 homes. Second home was it. I wrote an offer. So actually, here's the interesting. So it was Wednesday, I did the buyer consultation. That Saturday, we looked at 3 homes. Monday, we were ratified for a well over $400,000 house. At this point in my real estate career, I'm thinking, OMG, this is it. This is what's up. Like 4 days, 5 days, I'm already under contract. From being ratified on, I think that Monday, it drug out another 45, maybe a whole 60 days. So within this period of time to get them to closing, my buyers, the husband, no, yeah, that's right. So the couple, the guy was on it. I'd send him a doc, sign it. His girlfriend would drag, just wouldn't sign. And I would just be like, hey, I did the buyer consultation. I let them know like things are of the essence. I need these documents. So that was one aspect. She would drag, he would be on it. They decided to get married during the home buying process. So their names changed. In the meantime, I don't know. I with this transaction, I learned how to write an extension. I don't know how many extensions I had to actually write with this transaction. It was a good thing. Sadly for the seller, older couple, he fell, it was during the winter. He fell in New York, broke his hip. So he was out of commission. So he couldn't close, which was fine because we had to extend again. It was absolutely insane, just the transaction. This was actually my second transaction as an agent. It was so crazy that when it closed, and I did land the plane. Okay, at the end of the day, I landed the plane. When it was closed, Mike Cooper was the lender, and I had like a good follow-up conversation with Mike, and he personally told me, he was like, I was talking to the listing agent, and he was like, he knew I was relatively new, and he was like, if Curtis was able to hang on and close this transaction, he's definitely going to be a good agent. And needless to say, the transaction closed, but it was just everything that was out of my control. It wasn't like I was dropping the ball. I wasn't doing my due diligence. I wasn't doing what I needed to do. It was just the other parties, but transaction closed. I even got them a turtle. This, like, it was on the wall when we, first looked at the house. It was a really big, like, stuffed turtle from Vietnam. The guy was a airplane pilot, retired airplane pilot from Vietnam, and so I was able to get them to include that in the deal as well. So they got a turtle, they got the house, and yeah, I closed the deal. But that was just a crazy, crazy trip.
That is awesome. So many twists and turns. Kudos, Curtis. You were baptized by fire.
Ooh, was I? Was I? Oh, I never knew stress. Just the gym or things I've been doing in the past. Man, every time the phone would ring, I'd have to jump up from the table. What's going on? Yeah, but I closed it out.
Excellent. Excellent, guys. The stick-to-itiveness, you got it. Who's next? Does anybody have any questions for Curtis, or who would like to go next?
Jasmine, I don't have any questions. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't have any questions for Curtis because I kind of know a lot of these situations because these guys, we talk all the time. And any of you guys who are having fun, I'm going to say, with your buyer transactions, yeah, you can call me and include me in it. Everybody else does. But it was interesting to hear Marcus tell his story about the furniture. And you guys know that's one of the things that I actually put in the book, because I had a client who wouldn't buy a house because the house didn't fit her furniture. So you're going to have some clients, and they're going to be unique and different. And you just got to make sure you work. And I actually thought Marcus was telling my story, but it actually was his, which is great. But I'm going to share with you guys like a little trick that I learned to help get through buyer transaction. And what's interesting, just listening to you guys and your stories, all of them so far, Darlene, Curtis, and Marcus, is that once you've done a lot of transactions, they become very familiar to you. They might not have the same people, and it might not be the same property, but the situations aren't as unique as we might think they are. And there are some ways to resolve and solve most of those problems. You just have to, reflect back on what you're hearing and be able to go to those experiences to help solve the problems. And one of the things that I learned a long time ago, one of my first transactions, I had a boyfriend and a girlfriend who decided to buy a house. And they went through the process. Everything was going well, but I explained to them that they needed to make sure that they tell their lender everything that could possibly have happened in their past, no matter how long it was going to have been, because the underwriter invariably was going to find it. So that buyer's consultation helps tremendously as long as people do what you ask them to do. And what happened is we got all the way down to get ready to go to closing. And the underwriter discovered that the young lady, the girlfriend, had been involved in a car accident that was actually her fault, but the way it was reported was as though it was the other person's fault. Then further investigations, make a long story short, she had to give the money back, and she still owed that money. so now we're at the table. We had both of the couple pre-approved, but now they're disqualified. Well, it's great when you have a great lender. So, I spoke to Mike. I said, it has to be something we can do. We got to put our heads together, figure out what we can do. The young man, he couldn't qualify by himself. So we needed another person. He didn't have any family. It just so happened that the girl's father was very well qualified and was willing to step in to help them get their home. So we had to take the girl off of the property. And so the boyfriend and the father actually are the owners of the house, put it that way. So to make a long story short, we had to get the father qualified, get him on the loan, send it back to underwriting. And then the boyfriend and the girl's father are the actual owners of the house and went to sign. And then I think the father ended up turning his, giving her his portion of the title after it was up. But the bottom line is that was a solution. That was the way we had to resolve it. Well, come around the corner a few years later, and this was more recently. This was maybe a year or two ago. Had a husband and a wife, very well qualified. Everything was going well. Got down to get ready to go to settlement, and the husband, on this occasion, the husband's credit score dropped, like Marcus was saying, with credit scores, or Curtis, with the credit scores dropping, or it was Marcus, I think, with the credit score drop. So, this house, they weren't going to get the house. And the seller we had already had a couple of instances where we had to extend this contract. The sellers weren't happy. So I really had to figure out a way to get to settlement. And I reflected back on the first situation. And I said, you have 4 daughters. Which one of your daughters would be willing to be pre-qualified so that you can get a house? Make a long story short, not only did the daughter come from college to sign the paperwork, she's a homeowner as a college student, her and her mom, and dad is not on the deed. So the point of the matter is, it doesn't matter how you get them, get that plane landed. Sometimes you got to switch pilots. You got to do whatever you got to do. People got to jump seats. You got to get people on the plane that wasn't even on the plane. But you have to be creative in that regard, in that way, and reach out to people who have experience, and reach out to me, and we can try to resolve these issues, because you're going to have some of these creative situations if you're going to do this work, and we can always figure out a way. If the people are willing to get the job done here at Porterhouse.
Excellent story of overcoming, and being flexible. Because I remember that transaction too. The daughter had to co-sign and be on the loan. That was excellent. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Porter?
Oh, wait a minute, Jasmine, I forgot. And that meant that the father's portion of the earnest money deposit we couldn't use. Mm-hmm. So now the daughter had to come with her bank account money, and we had to use her earnest money deposit. So she had to supplement her money for. She really loved her father. Put it that way. It was really a good ending, but she was not happy to be there. She was supposed to be doing her finals. It was crazy. It was pouring down, raining. It started thundering and lightning. The buyer, he worked at FedEx, so he couldn't get there. It was just crazy. It was a very interesting transaction.
Yet and still, you made it to settlement for your buyers. That is it's such an awesome testimonial, guys. And we want you guys to hear these things and know that it ends well. The vast majority of the time, it ends well. As long as your buyer remains invested in the process and the seller is committed to selling the property, 9 times out of 10, it's going to close. So no matter what you come up against, you just remain confident, you remain steadfast, and you keep your buyer encouraged in that process. And anytime an obstacle comes up, you got to have the mindset is that you have to have the type of mindset to know that where there's a will, there's a way. And chances are there are multiple solutions. You just got to find the one that's going to best fit that situation in order to get your buyer to their expected. So kudos to that. I remember that transaction, Mr. Porter. I remember a lot more to that as well, like with the earnest money deposit and it having to come from the daughter and then switching to the daughter and her bank account and some hush money between the two parties, and not hush money, but she money, that wasn't, nobody wanted the other party to know about. I remember a whole lot of stuff about each of these transactions that you guys are sharing.
I'll share that part when we get off recording.
Yes.
I want you guys to really laugh at that part, but I'll share that once we get off the recording.
But kudos in getting to settlement. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Porter? Otherwise, who would like to go next?
I have a question for Mr. Porter. And the question is simply this, Mr. Porter, with all the twists and turns that took from start to finish, how long did it take total before you got to the table, to get to the table and get everything done?
Is this my friend Caramon?
This is this, sir. Yes, sir.
Caramon, you know that I only answer your questions on Tuesday. Today is Thursday. You call me back. But
well, anyway, that's only because I missed you on Tuesday, so I figured I could slip one in.
Everybody else is on the line. I'm gonna go ahead and answer your question this time, Caramon.
I appreciate that.
So I think we initially, we had the closing for 30 days. We extended to 45 days. And then I think we ended up extending another 30 days to get the door to qualify. So the sellers were not happy. They weren't happy because of the situation with the earnest money. I even think they made, they complained to the board on me, as if I had something to do with it, and I had to respond to it. And the seller did. The seller, as if I had something to do with them putting the earnest money deposit in, and that person's money deposit wasn't. So they thought I was helping them concoct all of these things. It was just what was happening in order for us to close. But they continued to agree to extend it because they didn't have any other viable offers at the time. So, the board told them, listen, you had multiple opportunities to cancel this contract. And Mr. Porter did everything in terms of, remember I told you, disclosure. I don't have to tell their confidential information, and I never did tell the seller what my client's confidential information was, but I did tell them we need to do an extension. There's some problems the way that this earnest deposit was turned in. We're gonna have to do that. And they had to agree to everything. The buyer and seller had to agree. Buyer's disclosing that the buyer needs to remove part of the earnest money deposit, but replace it with a different buyer. Or we're gonna have to change the buyer's name from the father to the daughter. Every chance that I got to disclose, I disclosed it, and they signed off on it. So that was the saving grace. And that's why we say disclose, disclose, disclose.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
Excellent points there, and great question to you, Kermon. At the end of the day, that 2.5 months ended in a settlement with 2 happy clients. Actually, 3 when you include the daughter.
2.5.
2.5. There you go. We'll go with that. So that's good. And just like Mr. Porter said, because he disclosed everything, although the sellers were upset about the amount of time it took, we can't control that. Our goal is to make sure that we do everything that we can to help our clients meet their expected end. So you did a stellar job. Kudos. I have a fun story that I'll share with you guys too. Does anybody have anything right now? Otherwise, I will go next. Figure this one will be fun for you guys. So this was my very first buyer transaction as a brand new agent, fresh out of real estate school. And my sister, she was just on a television show, and she had won $250,000 in order for her to buy a house. Now, the stipulation was she had to purchase a house within a certain amount of time. And while I was in real estate school, I had referred her to another trusted family friend to represent her. And they were going on for 6 months without purchasing a house. So now fast forward, I'm finished with real estate school. I'm fully affiliated, with the brokerage. So now I can take over and help her through this process. But guess what? Now that whole 6-month time period that they spent left us with only 10 days before there was a follow-up to the show. And it's a very familiar show. You guys are likely familiar with Undercover Boss, and you can look it up. It's the Undercover Boss DC, what is it, DC USA or something like that, DCA. And you'll see Angel on there. Well, I only had 10 days where they had 6 months at first. So and Shay will tell you about this. She called him and she complained about me, and she's like, have Jasmine to treat me like a client. She's treating me like I'm her sister. And pretty much I had to reel her in because I let her know this is, now it's a little bit different because she's my sister. We have to be a lot more gentle when it's not your immediate family member. But I had to focus her very quickly. And we went from driving up to Baltimore one day to look at 3 or 4 properties, to being over in Capitol Heights another day looking at 3 or 4 properties, to being over in Laurel, because that's how she was in terms of the focus. Well, we got her focused, got her under contract, and we closed that deal in 7 days from the time that we were under contract to closing. And because she was a cash buyer, back during those times, there wasn't much of a delay with title work. So we got that deal closed so quickly. However, you're talking about a home inspection that was littered with all kind of issues. This property, in case you guys don't know, when a property is renovated, when it's fully renovated by an investor, then that property is supposed to meet the standard as new builds in today's market, or whatever year the property was renovated at. So very different than an owner occupied property that maybe they've done some work, maybe they've had some things done. When it's being flipped by an investor, it has to be up to the standard code for the day and time that the property is being sold. Therefore, that inspection report had so many items, guys. I'm talking about from a foundation that wasn't even closed. So the property, between the property and the ground, there was like a space that you could actually see up under. There were so many items of concern. So what did we do? We negotiated those items. And remember, we only had 7 days there. It was 10 days until the show was about to happen again. So we're in this 7-day timeline, and we negotiated all of the repairs. The investor agreed to do all of the repairs. Great, no problem. We're excited. We're going to be able to make settlement on time. They agreed to everything. Let's celebrate. Yeah, okay. We got to the property for our re-inspection, and probably 80% of the repair items had not been completed. And this is maybe 2 days out from settlement. About 80% of the repair items had not been completed. So we, had the inspector to do another follow-up, inspection. So we sent back over those items again, and, settlement was right around the corner, 2 days out. So they repaired the vast majority of the items very quickly, which was impressive. However, the roof, the inspector required a roof certification because he said, this doesn't look right. We need a roof certification. They repaired everything. Repaired. They repaired everything except for the roof. We were still going through the process of having a roof certification done. So because they repaired everything, the buyer was willing to go to settlement. So in order to make sure that the buyer was covered, we negotiated an escrow holdback from the seller until we could get this roof certification. So we negotiated an escrow holdback for $10,000 to make sure that the roof was certified, or enough to make sure that the roof was able to be replaced. When I tell you about a week or so went past, we had a roofer, 2, 3 roofers to come out, and all of them said the same thing. They had gone over that roof 3 or 4 times with shingles. There were holes and dips in various places, and that entire roof needed to be replaced. But that didn't happen before settlement, because remember, we settled with the escrow holdback. The buyer's first night in that property, when they took the tarp off the roof and we went to settlement, it rained. And when I tell you it rained in that buyer's living room, it rained in the buyer's front bedroom, it rained in the upstairs room, it rained in the buyer's house. Okay. So I was so thankful because we had the wherewithal to negotiate an escrow holdback. So now we had the money at the title company in order to pretty much take it from the seller side, because they didn't complete it by the day that they were supposed to, and have the buyer to be able to hire their own professional. And then we got more on top of that to replace everything that was, wet by the water and all of those things. So the buyer turned out with an additional, I think maybe $15,000 or $20,000 or so, got a brand new roof on the property, got a number of other things replaced that would have just been, kind of repaired, if you will. And all of that happened in 7 days. How do you guys feel about that?
Wow.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
That was my first transaction. That was my first buyer side transaction. That was my first buyer side transaction. So listen, when you talk about being baptized by the fire, we have stories for days. We understand. At the end of the day, that buyer went to settlement. That buyer was happy. That buyer got all of the escrow money. They got a brand new roof. They got everything in the property repaired, and we moved forward happily. They moved into the property, and the very next day after they moved into the property, the store owner from Undercover Boss for Modell's, he sends all of these beds up to the house, to help furnish the brand new house. So we had a hard, fast timeline that we had to meet. Literally the next day, they come up with all these beds and everything is moving in. And that weekend, there was a follow-up. So they were shooting. So everything had to be in its place and properly fitted together for the follow-up shooting. So that was my first buying side transaction.
I have one question for you, Ms. Porter.
Sure.
After going through all that, did that ever make you think, I don't ever want to be a buyer's agent again? Or were you just excited about the whole thing? Or what was your feelings going all the way through it?
Kermon, I don't know if you know this about me, but when Mr. Porter says certain things about me, you should take heed to it. I'm kind of a fighter internally, so I like a good challenge. I was excited. When I tell you the family agent that we work with, she was no holds barred. She was not an attorney, but she taught me very well. And being able to navigate through that transaction like that, despite all of those twists and turns and obstacles, it gave me a sense of confidence. And the residue carried throughout my transactions thereafter, because all of the most difficult situations and nightmares that you would want to face all happened in my first transaction. So it's kind of like you earn your wings in a sense when you overcome those type of obstacles and you come out victoriously. You know that, there's nothing that you can't overcome. It's like, okay, what's next? Bring it on. So that's how I felt.
Yeah, okay, and that makes all the sense in the world to me. Knowing you like I do now, I was just wondering because it was your first time. I didn't know if you had grown to that, because you're so tenacious. So I didn't know if you had grown to that, or if that was just the way you started. So that's just good to hear. Thank you.
There you go. I said, bring it on. Just like that agent said about Curtis in his first transaction, saying if this guy overcame all of this in his first transaction, he's gonna do well. You want to have that same mindset and embrace it, right? The boring transactions are the ones that you learn least from, the ones that have all the twists and turns and obstacles. When I say baptized by fire, that's where you really get your education, and that's when you see what you're made of, and when you earn your wings, and you have the tenacity to stick to it and the resilience to, keep going and to come back. And no matter what happens, you're going to overcome that obstacle and get to your expected end. It really helps to build your confidence as an agent. Just depends on your perspective and the way that you view things. You just know that all things are possible. Keep moving forward. It will be well.
Wow.
And if
Well,
there's
that's
an obstacle, there's a solution. We'll find it.
good to know. Good to know. Thank you.
You are welcome. Anybody else have any questions?
I put the video in WhatsApp for everybody if you all want to watch it. I put the short clip. There's a long version, but this is a short synopsis of pretty much everything that happened in the show. And the young lady is Jasmine's oldest sister, Angel. And many of you may have already seen that video. I mean, it's been viewed 5 or 6 million times. So just on YouTube. So you probably familiar, you just didn't know that was Jasmine's sister. And the funny thing behind the scenes story was she came over Jasmine's house, or she came over our house. We just got married, I think, and Jasmine, she asked Jasmine to do her hair. And I remember they were up to 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, kept saying, this is really important. Like, they got me on TV. And she said, and I don't know what's going on. And I said, they have this new show out. And this was when the show was relatively new. I said, I think you're on that Undercover Ball show. She said, no, I don't think I'm on that Undercover Ball. I said, I think you're on that Undercover Ball show. And the next day she went and she was on the Undercover Ball show. And that's one of the most memorable ones. And I'm not just saying that because that's our sister, but that show is one of the most memorable shows. And once you guys see it, I think if you ever watched the show, you would be very familiar with it.
So in terms of insight, the story that we're telling you now, you know a little bit about behind the scenes and how she got to her expected end with the new house.
But carry on, to make a long story short, it was a mess. Okay, it was a mess. And Jasmine was so gung-ho to get that deal done in 7 to 10 days. Wow. That her sister called me and said, would you please tell your wife to treat me like a regular client? I said, she is. That's how she treats her regular clients.
Wow.
She got it done 6 months before that, 6 months worth of riding around and looking at properties. Absolutely not. 1031. And we got close.
Oh, okay.
You guys are awesome. This has truly been insightful. I'm excited because I know 99% of the stories that you guys are sharing, but to hear the further level of detail, it's really a tremendous benefit to all of your colleagues, because knowing that a challenge is not the end of the road. It's a challenge. Challenges are meant to be overcome. You wouldn't be more than conquerors if you didn't have something to conquer, and you wouldn't be overcomers if you didn't have something to overcome. So when you see Mr. Porter, he says 2 things. If you see a long line, get in it. And if you see a good fight, get in it. Now, that being said, the things that you desire to accomplish in life, if you have to fight for it, it's just the victory is going to be that much sweeter. So don't run away from a challenge. Just do what you have to do to overcome it, and you'll come out with a testimony on the other end of it. All right, guys. All right, well, it's 1:30. Any final thoughts, comments, or questions before we end for the day?
I want to hear, when you turn off the recording, I want to hear Mr. Porter's story.
Okay. Does anybody else have something that would contribute to the group on recording? All
I'll
right,
just piggyback back off of what Marcus said, because we are definitely motivators and counselors too, especially on the buying side. I'm not really, no, buying and listing, because I have listed, yeah, but definitely counselors.
I would definitely agree with that. From a transaction that went from a listing to a referral, that was interesting.
Excellent, guys. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, and then Mr. Porter, you can share the rest of that interesting transaction. And before I do, let me say our evening training is hybrid tonight, and we're continuing in our Working with Buyers series. So tonight we're going to be doing writing winning offers. So contract negotiation, that's what we're working on tonight. All right, guys?